Next up, we're going to hear from my mother, Rita Rose, who is going to read an article that was written by a lady reporter who somehow had the opportunity to go for a ride in a P-61. So, Mom, if you would come up here.
Good morning. This was sent to Tom Rose from Doug Pinkston. It's an amazing story about a young woman journalist that wanted to know what it was like to fly a night fighter mission. So here is her story. Nightlife in the City by Martha Gelhorn. Collier's girl correspondent sat on a wobbly crate and flew over Germany looking for enemy planes at night. Her nose ran, her oxygen mask slipped off, her stomach got mad, she was scared and she froze. They didn't down any Germans, but otherwise that's routine life for the Black Widow pilots. Radioed from France. In the daytime, the field was ugly, as all forward airfields are, with the improvised buildings of the 9th Air Force Squadron and a tent hospital outlining its edges. The air was thunderous with planes, and everyone looked small, eaten with cold and intently busy. But when darkness comes, all these fields are silent, and nothing moves, and they see the plateaus and the moon. When darkness comes, the Black Widows take over. The major commanding the 425th Night Fighter Squadron of the 9th Air Force must have been all of 26, blonde and tough, and with the hard, tired look one is used to seeing on the face of all the young. He was making a speech. His squadron headquarters had been pieced together from the wood of a German barracks, and it was very cold, with one iron stove to heat the room and badly lighted by a few unshaded bulbs. "Lady," he said earnestly, "everyone shoots at us. Friendly bombers and friendly flak and enemy fighters. Just anybody at all. They all have a right to shoot at us. I wouldn't advise it." Last night, one of their planes had been shot down, and the squadron doctor who had driven over to the place where the plane crashed returned to report that nothing remained of the pilot and the radio operator except 4 feet and 2 hands. There was now never any time for pity or sorrow. At least there is no time to show these feelings. "Well," said the major, if you're going, you better come with me. I'm on the first mission." We ate supper at 5, and it was already night. They had their mess in a large, untidy, dark, icy house. The pilots and radio operators ate in a big room wearing their flying clothes, and they passed heavy dishes of lukewarm, unpalatable food around the long tables, and they laughed and shouted to one another, eating in haste. A captain beside me began to list again the horrors of night flying until the major said, "She is coming with us now, so leave her alone. Tell her something good." "Flying can be beautiful," the captain said at once. "It will be beautiful. Anyhow, it's certainly beautiful up here, and it's going to be very nice night." I was handed a bowl of food which I could not recognize. So pilots having the best food is the silliest myth of all. Actually, they live like hell at these forward fields. It is only one step better than the foxhole. Mostly they sleep in tents, and there is no escaping the cold, and there is nothing to do but fly, sleep, eat, and wait to fly again. They do not apparently see anything remarkable in these living conditions. They always speak with pity. of the infantry who have a truly rugged life. After supper, we went back to squadron headquarters. I was zipped into flying pants, flying boots, and flying jacket, feeling more and more breathless at each layer. The major appeared with an oxygen mask, and there was some difficulty in fitting the thing. "They didn't make these for ladies," he said. "Can you breathe?" Someone was stuffing gloves in my hand, and someone else was attempting to fasten a parachute on me. I found myself choking inside the mask and shook my head, and the major said, "Okay, that'll do." We now piled into a jeep again. The major, the radio operator, the driver, and I. It was pretty difficult to hoist one's body around, and there was a marked tendency to sit down when one meant to stand up, due to the weight of the parachute on one's bottom. It was so cold that one shrank into one's clothes and felt oneself shivering in the wind. Now we could see the sleek, sharp outline of the black plane. It was a beautiful place with the two up-curling tails and the long, narrow wings, and it looked in the night like a delicate, deadly dragonfly. No one spoke in the jeep. The radio operator said thoughtfully, "This is the worst part of my mission." After that, we were too busy to think about better or worse. The major climbed in the cockpit and began getting the plane ready. The radio operator was delegated to give me the necessary information. This was all so hopelessly mad that could only be taken as a joke. He said in the dark, "If anything happens, you turn this handle. How to make a quick exit." "What handle? Where?" I said to myself nervously. I could not find the wretched thing. "That will open the trap. Then turn this other handle on the right. It's wired, but you won't leave any trouble. That will drop the ladder out, and then all you have to do is fall out backward. You know where your ripcord is, don't you?" "Yes," I said sadly. "If anything goes wrong with those two, you turn the handle on the cowling, and that whole piece of glass will fall out, and you can climb on through. That it's a little narrow with all those clothes on, but it will be all right, I guess." "Well, that's about all," said he. "Have you got a cushion for her?" he asked the crew chief, and from nowhere a rather flat little soft cushion appeared and was put on top of the wooden crate which was to be my seat. No one was intended to ride back here in the glass bulb between the twin tails, and there was no seat or safety belt. "Oh, and your oxygen mask," said the radio operator. "It plugs in here, and this is your telephone plug-in." I had given up hope by now. It was all too complicated, and I thought gloomily that every one of those darn wires would come undone. I would fall out without meaning to, or get hurled off my crate and mashed against the confused steel side of the cute little glass case, and I was already cold, and so I decided to try very hard to think of something else, like, for instance, a nice hot bath, or next summer, or going to the movies. Meanwhile, a brisk, businesslike conversation went on in the cockpit. Everyone's voice came through the earphones, so deafening that I could scarcely distinguish words. But from the tone of it, it sounded as calm and sensible as if you were talking about whether there was enough gas and oil in the car to get to the country club. We simply hurled into the night and soared for the stars. I had never been part of such a takeoff, and the actual feeling of flying became so intense that one fell free of the plane as if one were moving naked and with no hindrance through a sky that was bigger than any sky had ever been before. It was very beautiful, too, with a glowing moon and the stars close. I knew that I was in inferior soul, because the beauty was not going to soothe my spirit or hold my attention. The beauty was a vast emptiness in which we roared alone, and the beauty was a good deal too scary for my taste. Now the conversation began on the radio, or whether it had been going on all along, only it seemed clear now. Somewhere on the distant, dark, snow-covered earth, men would be sitting in a hidden caravan, crouched over black magic radio instruments, and a voice came from wherever they were speaking, a very technical code, and this plane obeyed that voice. At hundreds of miles an hour, we fled blindly through the night. A night fighter pilot is directed by radio instruments to his quarry, which he cannot see, and he must not fire until he has a visual, that is, until he actually sees and identifies the other plane. And he can be as close as 200 yards from the enemy plane before he is certain of it. Until that time, one swerves and swoops, climbs and falls alone, like a strange mad bird, obeying the voice of the ground control. It was easy to realize how busy the two men in the cockpit were. The radio operator must interpret these directions and give the course to the pilot, who must instantly drive the plane according to his rapid changing orders. They would be so completely and fiercely absorbed in their work that they would have little time to think, or so I imagine it. All standards in war seem insane. These men fly every night, often twice, and sometimes 3 times a night. That is their job, and they do it as if it were perfectly normal. We were over Germany and a blacker, less inviting piece of land I never saw. It was covered with snow. There were mountains. There was no light and no sign of human life. But the land itself looked actively hostile. Then the voice of the ground said something. The pilot said, "Roger," and the plane simply vaulted up the sky. This ranked easily as one of the nastiest sensations I have ever felt. We climbed in a matter of seconds from 11,000 to 22,000 feet. That does not sound like much written out, but it felt like nothing human. One's body turned to iron and was crushed down, a feeling as if an enormous weight were pressing on something that would not yield. My oxygen mask was too large and had to be held on. As I held it with my right hand and onto some kind of steel shelf with my left hand, so as not to fall backward of my darling little crate, I thought that my stomach was going to be flattened against my backbone and I was going to strangle. Guided to our destination. The loathsome set of feelings went on, and meantime the radio conversation sharpened and went faster and louder. And I knew, though the words were muddled, that we were being led to our quarry. I had now reached a stage of dull resignation, and I only prayed that we would stop doing whatever we were doing and do something else. The plane stopped climbing, and now it was too hard to breathe. An added charm is that one's nose, a reasonably earthly instrument, flows steadily in the cold and of course is unwipeable presently, since the temperature inside the plane was 30 below zero. One finds oneself without anything to wipe one's face because it is a minor matter, but there it is. The plane, driven on by the loud brown voice, was roaring high straight through the sky. Then, for no reason I could discover, we turned over on a wing and dropped sideways a few miles toward the ground. That too was an undesirable sensation. One's inside seemed to drain away, leaving one empty and weak and not all certain which side was upright. The pilot said something to me in a nice, cozy voice, but I did not understand. He repeated that we had just dropped through the sky that way in order to avoid flak at Cologne. It appeared that we had been following a friendly plane, which must have been a bomber, and was copying the flak above Cologne. It seemed very restful to be flying level at 11,000 feet again. The radio voices chattered to each other, apparently saying what a pity. The whole thing had been better luck next time. Everything seemed pretty calm now, except for the fact that we were still over Germany, which was a no good place to be. Then the pilot called to me over the intercom, and looking where he told me, I saw the tail of a V-2. It came from somewhere deeper inside Germany and was, at this distance, a red ball of fire, and it rose perpendicularly from the ground and passed out of sight over the top of the sky in a few seconds. Then there was gun flashes to the west, where the front seemed to be waking up. There was a huge gun which opened like a blast furnace, only I could not tell whether it was theirs or ours. On the ground, we now saw fixed flares, and again did not know what they were. Then there would be the sudden quaking, soundless fire of the guns, closing in for the kill. Then the ground voice spoke again, giving brisk orders, and a plane flicked neatly over on a wing and glided steeply downward. The pilot was asking questions, and more orders came from the ground. I could tell that we were hunting and getting close. It seemed to me by now that this had been going on forever. One had sat since the beginning of time on a wobbly crate in the middle of heaven, and there was no end to it. Then the plane slowed, terrifying. I felt as if it was standing, still in the air, and at the same time, the pilot's voice cracked angrily on the radio. Nothing happened. There was some reply from the ground, and the pilot said very angrily, "For God's sake." The snow-covered land was nearer now, and so were the gun flashes. The pilot spoke again on the intercom. We had been on the trail of an authentic enemy plane, but due to some miscalculation on the ground dial, we were guided wrongly. We were therefore briefly in the unfortunate position of getting shot rather than doing the shooting. But luckily the Heine did not waste no flight and had streaked off west and lost himself. The pilot was furious, and now we were going home, as the time limit was nearly up. Suddenly the pilot said, "See the flak?" I had seen it to the left. I thought it was low and far away, and I was sad for the unlucky men who were getting it. This proves forever that ignorance is bliss. School of thought. The flak was shooting at us. The distance was too close for comfort, and I imagined that the shells went no higher than the tracers. We did another quiet aerial pirouette and roared for home. We landed as if we had taken off, which is to say like a bolt of lightning. We'd been out a little over 2.5 hours, and the major was almost blue with cold. He had not been heavily dressed because he would not fly the plane if his body was hampered by all that clothing. So for 2.5 hours now, and probably for 2.5 hours later that night, and every other night, he would sit in a plane in a temperature of 30 degrees below zero, and simply take it. He did say in passing, "Gosh, it's very cold." The major was rather depressed about the evening. It had been a boring patrol. Nothing had happened. There was one good chance of a fight, and it had been mucked up, and all in all, he felt browned off. So we climbed stiffly into the jeep and went back to the squadron shack. The other planes of this mission were coming in. landing at that soul-shaking speed. And a new mission would be leaving within a few minutes. The end.